Welcome to Fun and Games Side Quests. Every episode is a different host sharing a video game they love and why they love it.
Hi, my name is Daniel. Online I tend to go by Caaz, and professionally I'm a web developer. But I'm also a hobbyist game developer, and part of my research while learning game development has been playing games and getting a good understanding of the design choices developers make to make their game fun. I figured coming onto this podcast would give me a good chance to do that with a game that I have grown to love, RimWorld. If you don't know what it is, RimWorld's a game where you guide a group of survivors who have crash-landed onto a hostile planet. You have to build homes and rooms for various tasks, farm the native vegetation, and hunt the local wildlife. Over time, you research new technology, and eventually you can build a spaceship and leave. RimWorld doesn't just feel like a colony sim, though. Your colonists aren't just units or a tool for you to beat the game. They all have names and backstories, families, personalities, and passions. You find that the most difficult thing to manage about your colony isn't even the chaotic world they've landed on, but the unique relations and opinions of your colonists. People that know me well know I've complained about this game a lot more than I've praised it, and part of that is because it's got so many things it can throw at you, so you really don't know what you're going to be up against, and that can be really frustrating. But I also think that's what makes me keep coming back to it. I want to master this game. I want to figure out how to solve all of the problems it throws at me. But there's only so much you can do before you wind up with a house full of traps and turrets. RimWorld doesn't even consider itself a game, actually. It's labeled as a story generator, and I think I can get behind that. Every run can start similar, but over time, the trickle of random events leads to crazy outcomes. You never really know what your game's going to look like day to day, and I think that's really interesting. To prove its worth as a story generator, I'd like to tell you a story about my colony, the Hados Nation. Everything I explain here happened in-game, and I hope it gives you an idea of what it's like to play it. It starts out with 3 escape pods crash landing into the planet, and out came 3 disoriented survivors, along with a dog. Greg was the first to get to work chopping down trees. He was a brooding man, a doctor, but good with a gun. Rye was laying the foundation for a small room. He's an artist by trade, but he grew up with animals and had a knack for training them. Alia was a chef and farmer. Like the others, she stumbled out of the escape pod nauseous. But along with the cryosleep sickness, she was also pregnant. Finally, there was Lila, a golden Labrador. She followed Greg along as he worked. It boosted everyone's mood to see a friend in high spirits despite everything. Before the day had ended, they'd finished their work, gathered their supplies, and rested in a small hut. The first challenge to the colony arrived in the form of a mad raccoon. Mad with power, I assume. It was making a beeline for Alia, who had started building a kitchen and dining area. Greg stopped what he was doing and rushed out with Lila at his heel, and his rifle at the ready. He missed quite a few shots, but eventually felled the beast before it could do any damage. Knowing Alia's pregnancy had only a few days left, the group got to work building a single hospital room and making sure the house was clean, laying down wooden floors and building a small crib next to Alia's bed. It was just as they finished that the Tox Gang decided to raid. The Tox Gang were a neighboring colony who relied on looting the weak and unprepared for their survival. Thankfully, they only sent 1 raider, but it was enough to reach the door where Greg was standing guard. The raider managed to stab him in the stomach before Lila stepped in and put an end to their struggle. Greg was rapidly bleeding out on the porch. If it weren't for Lila, he likely wouldn't have survived. He crawled back inside, grabbed a medical kit, and tended to himself. The next morning, Alia cleaned up the mess of that event, and Greg rested in the hospital room. She fed Greg what was left of their dwindling rations, and over time the two became close. A relationship was forming. Even in these uncertain times, they found a way to make it work. Greg eventually recovered, and over the next few days, as their rations ran out, he and Rye hunted deer in the surrounding area. Suddenly, though, they heard the distant growls of a warg. This large, wolf-like creature was hunting Lila, who was patrolling the home area, keeping Alia safe at home. Greg ran back towards the house where Lila was, but it was too late. Lila stood no chance against the razor-sharp claws and brutal bite strength of the warg. By the time Greg got in range to shoot, she was already gone. Everyone in the colony felt the loss of Lila immediately. Greg most of all. Alia, who was still resting in the home, suddenly went into labor. rushing to the single hospital room, alone. Rye raced as fast as he could from the far side of the mountain to their aid. Greg started pulling the trigger of his rifle frantically and managed to land 4 shots before the warg closed in on him, tearing into his chest with its massive claws. He finally knocked it out with the barrel of his bolt-action rifle. As the warg lay dazed on the ground, he ran back inside and tended to his wounds. Rye finished off the warg and began tending to Alia as best he could. She gave birth to a baby boy, Ivo Lai Kobayashi. Rye walked outside and carried the warg's body to the freezer to be butchered for the food the next day. Lila was brought inside too, but not for food, for preservation. As night fell and all were resting, blueprints were drawn up for when they awoke. A steel sarcophagus for the honored dead. I feel I should call it there. All of that occurred within about a day of gameplay. It's only scratching the surface of everything that can happen in a game, and I had to leave some events out, like a guinea pig invasion and a few small quests where nothing really happened. But I hope that gives you an idea of what it's like to play RimWorld. And maybe you'll give it a try. But whatever your story might be, happy gaming.
Are you tired of watching your beloved characters being tortured by careless authors?
Are you sick of feeling like they could have swapped out all of the painful action and the plot would remain untouched? Subscribe to Books That Burn, the fortnightly book review podcast focusing on fictional depictions of trauma.
We assume that the characters' reactions are reasonable and focus on how badly or well they were served by their authors.
Join us for our minor character spotlights, main character discussions, and favorite non-traumatic things in the dark books we love.
Find us on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.